Okay, it's right at 9, so let's go ahead and get started because we want to maximize our time with Jen. We are at capacity for this training, so I know that this is something that is interesting for a lot of people who are joining us. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Erin with the Alpine Area Agency on Aging, and Amanda, if you'll move to the next slide for us, please. Thanks. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Because we are a large group of people, everyone is automatically muted, but you can ask a question or make a comment in the chat box that will be monitored, and either Amanda, who's with us, or Jen will be able to see that directly herself, and we will respond to anything that you put into the chat box. There is also going to be time for questions and answers at the end, but feel free to include anything in that chat box right away while you're thinking about it. And this presentation is recorded, so in case we run into any hiccups or you have to leave early or you'd like to send this information to a peer or a friend, we will have this information for you later. That being said, as I'm sure many of us have been on Zoom webinars lately, we have done everything in our power to keep there from being any technological glitches, but give us some grace if we encounter any issues today. Amanda, if you'll move to the next one, please. So this is put on by the Alpine Area Agency on Aging. We provide services and supports to people 60 and over and their caregivers in the 5-county region of Eagle, Jackson, Grand, Pitkin, and Summit counties. And I am super excited to introduce Jen Hanslick. She's the founder and owner of Clutter Trucker, which is a hoarding cleanout company based in Denver. We got connected because I had been hearing from a lot of my providers, specifically case managers, that they were encountering a lot more hoarding and were unsure of the resources and just wanted more information about how to best deal with clients and talk about what was going on. And so Jen is local here in Colorado. She's an expert and she provides education and awareness on the topic of hoarding disorder. She was a featured speaker at TEDx in Boulder, and you can see that video on her website. She shares what she's learned to inspire change for those who are suffering and helps others understand this complex mental illness. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jen. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to use that chat box, and we'll go ahead and let you start, Jen. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. This, share my screen. Okay. All right, everyone. Thanks for coming today. Originally, I was going to come up there and speak at the conference. So even though I can't see all of your faces, we can just imagine that we're all here learning today. So today, this webinar, it's not going to be a lot of statistics, definitions, and a clinical aspect to hoarding. I'll add a little bit of that in there. But today, I really want you guys to listen to the webinar today more from your heart than your head. So a lot of times, there's a lot of information out there as far as for hoarding with the book definitions and stuff. But this is more, I'm going to share stories that hopefully you can all relate to. So as you're listening, maybe something will resonate with you. You'll hear a similarity in the clients that I speak about that maybe you can apply to some clients on your own, or maybe you'll even apply it to yourself. So, and as they said, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, and then Amanda's going to either make the decision to interrupt me, which I'm totally fine with if it's pertinent to the place that we're at in the presentation, and I'm going to save a lot of time at the end because I know that sharing stories helps a lot of people learn that way. So recently I was called out to meet a client named Jim. So Jim came from Adult Protective Services, and all they did was call and tell me that they had a client in need, that he was being resistant and he didn't want help. They said that he hadn't left his home in over a year. So what they told me was his sister was bringing him food and she was leaving it on his front door. They never went inside. They were too afraid to go inside. So they called me. As I walk up to his door, this is when I see the big red sign. And this is what it says: danger. This building is unsafe for human occupancy. It is a crime to occupy this building or to remove this card. So immediately I take a breath. He was allowed to come into his home in the days to clean it up. So I wasn't even sure that he was going to stay or be able to answer the door. So as I walk up, I knock on the door and I wait. It's just like I could tell this is a home of someone in need because the bushes are overdrawn, the paint is peeling. And then I hear him. He's on the other side of the door. And he squeezes out the opening. Like he barely opens the door, just enough to squeeze through. And as Jim comes through, I notice that he has clean, slicked back hair. He has a white shirt and he comes outside and he's already shaking. He's physically sick from the stress of everything that's going on. And he comes and he sits down on the front porch and he says, I've tried to clean this up so many times, but I just can't do it on my own. He said the neighbor kids were throwing rocks at my window and they broke them, and I've been afraid to go outside. Then he says, I was seeing a therapist so many times, but I stopped going, and I never told her what the inside of my home looked like. He said, with everything piled high, you're going to see it piled high against my walls. But I was doing that because my furnace is broken and it's insulating my walls. So finally I stop. I say, Jim, I have to go inside. Is it okay? I just need to go inside and look and see what the inside of your house is like so that we can see what it'll cost to clean it up. So then Jim says, yes, he doesn't want to go in with me because he doesn't want to see the look on my face when I go inside. So he says, just go on without me. And he stays outside. So when I go inside his home, I see what you would see in any home. Jim really loved computers. He was a brilliant man. He had computers and he liked to take them apart and put them back together. And then he had books and he had blankets and he had boxes and he had wrappers from the trash that he hadn't taken out in years. So I'm making my way through the house and I'm looking at everything, and I get to the point in his bathroom and I see that he has Ocean Spray cranberry juice bottles, but it looks like they're filled with apple juice. And so then I know not only is his furnace broken, but so is his plumbing. I see the Home Depot buckets and they're full of his waste. And this is so common and it doesn't freak me out. But now I know why he doesn't want to come inside. So I hurry back outside and I sit with him because I know he's ashamed, he's mortified. I come back outside, he's sitting there. I can see the tears running down his face. And he says, and this is what many, many of them say. He says, is this the worst you've ever seen? And I say, no, it's not the worst I've ever seen. And it's not that bad. I can help you clean it up. And he says, what do you mean it's not that bad? And I tell him, it's not that bad. I can help. And he says, you are an angel. When can you start? So I started my business, Clutter Trucker, back in September of 2008. So the times are almost similar. I mean, we have a lot of similarities to where we're at right now. But I was laid off in corporate America. This was at the time when all of the banks and the mortgage crisis was going on. So I was laid off from corporate America and I didn't know what I wanted to do. So at the time, I was watching the TV show. There were CEOs were on, they were still getting bonuses. Every day a different bank would fail. And I thought I did not want to go back to financial advising. So what I did is I decided to take some time off. The thought of doing my resume was just, it wasn't going to happen. So I did Habitat for Humanity. I went to Haiti on a medical mission trip, and I wanted to find my passion. So I did what anybody would do at that time, and I watched Oprah. So at the time, Oprah was on, and she was doing a show with Maria Shriver. And Maria Shriver, she had a book, and it was called Just Who Will You Be? And it was fascinating to me because it wasn't what will you do, but rather who will you be? It was 92 pages. So I read the book thinking that I would get inspired. And my mom at the time, she called me and she said, hey, we have to go over to our grandpa's house. He's in the hospital. Again, this is very common to what happens. He's in the hospital and they can't come home until we check and see their house. We hadn't been allowed in their house for many, many years. We would always meet at a restaurant. So my mom and I went over there. This is before all of the TV shows that are out now. So we didn't know what we were walking into, but we couldn't even get in the front door. So we had to go around to the back, and it was a very narrow path. I remember there being, the kitchen sink was full of dishes, and there were gnats and bugs in the house, and they were only sleeping on one little section of their bed. So we were shocked at this time. But and then it took us 3 months to work on this house, on their house, while they were in the hospital. And we did it all wrong. So I learned so much, and I came up with the business idea at this time while we had to go through the process of helping my grandparents. We, at one point in time, we were trying to reason with my grandmother, who had a whole closet full of shoes with high heels. We were trying to reason with her and tell her, you know, you're never going to wear these shoes again. But to her, it didn't matter. She got really upset. It's actually traumatizing to do these big clean outs. She called the cops on us at one point. And I remember we were in Sheridan County, and the cops came. They saw the house and they saw the pile, and they just looked at us with wide-eyed, and they were like, carry on. They understood we were doing it for the best intentions, although we didn't know that we were doing it all wrong. The end result ended up to be okay, even though it was a forced clean out. After the cops came, I remember my grandma and grandpa being able to come home, and on the coffee table, which had been buried years before, there was a picture of my sister, my brother, and I know that was her way of saying it's okay. She recovered, but it took some time. What I didn't know at that time was how many people are truly living in hoarded conditions. So I don't really use the term hoarder. I think that hoarder implies it's their identity, and I think we need to get away with that from that. So people with hoarding is an easier way to say it, or people who have hoarding tendencies, you'll hear me say that. But it's estimated that 2 to 5% of the population is diagnosed with hoarding disorder. So if that is the case, then that would be 15 million people in the United States. That is more people than what is estimated to have Alzheimer's disease. But with Alzheimer's, there's foundations and there's research and there's a lot of empathy surrounding Alzheimer's. But hoarding disorder, even though there's more people, they don't share the same resources and empathy that Alzheimer's. And you have to wonder why. If it is 5%, that's 1 in 20 people. So usually there's someone in the room that sometimes they stand up and they'll say they're challenged with having too much stuff. But what I kind of want to talk about now, because I found it fascinating, and some of you might be on the call to really acknowledge that there's probably a lot more people out there with hoarding tendencies with what is happening in the current environment. So I'll tell you a little bit about what happened, because I have a business and we had clients when everything with the virus, the coronavirus came about, and we had to shut down for a little bit. When the immediate news of a lockdown came and people were going to have to be in their homes for an extended period of time, that level of uncertainty created everywhere fear and panic. So then what happened with fear and panic? Then people immediately started to hoard. Some people, not everybody, but the fear is contagious. So what happened, then people began, you saw it all over the news, and maybe even some of you went out to go buy more items than you normally would because you were afraid. And when you're afraid, there's that place in your brain, the fight, the flight, or the freeze. It will make you do irrational things you probably would have never done. The point of the toilet paper, I had heard, there's a lot of different theories out there, but the point that it was toilet paper was, one, because it's relatively inexpensive. So you can buy a lot for relatively inexpensive, not a lot of money. And two, it was big, so you could actually see it. So in our brains, when we're under that type of fear and panic, we wanted something to help us feel safety or secure. So toilet paper was the thing that people were choosing. And then from there, it's a little bit contagious. So then you go and you don't see any, and the shelves are bare. So then everybody kind of plays into that. But what happened for me at that time, I was like, the similarities between my clients and knowing or thinking that they have been living in a state of fear and anxiety for years. Now, everyone's in that state of fear and uncertainty and panic. So a lot of people could relate to those who were hoarding. That was one thing that really struck me. And then what also struck me with what's going on right now is with people that have to stay in their homes. So hoarding also is a lot of people are isolated. So they're choosing to be isolated because of the shame behind closed doors. Their blinds are pulled down. They don't let people in, and they don't go outside a lot. And now what's a little bit ironic is that a lot of us are faced to be isolated. So, you know, a lot of my clients at that time would text and then they say, you know, are you coming to help today? And I said, unfortunately, we can't. We have to go through some procedures. We're going to shut down for a little bit, but we'll be able to be back in your home. And one of my clients said, yeah, let everyone walk a mile in my shoes. I mean, she felt a little bit validated that now she's not the only one crazy out there, that everyone is showing this tendency. So I think in one way, that is one area that people with hoarding could feel a little bit better about themselves, knowing they're not the only ones with this inherent need to stockpile under times of panic and fear. But the other thing that did happen with this virus, with people being forced to change all of their behaviors, you know, staying at home, I think it intensified everybody personally where they're at. So if somebody was challenged with hoarding, it kind of showed a spotlight on that, because now they're not allowed to go out and buy because the stores were closed. So that could have been very hard. A lot of people, like, for example, if you're struggling with gambling, then Vegas shut down, Central City shut down. That's just going to shine a spotlight at an area in your life that you may need to look at. That could be challenging. I think that relationships, either if you're in one that's not healthy, that you don't want to be, or if you're alone and you're not in a relationship. The fascinating thing about this coronavirus is that it meets everybody personally, and no two people are dealing with it the same. So that's where we can have a lot of grace and a lot of compassion, because what you are going through is not at all what somebody else is going through. And that's similar to hoarding. So you're going to hear some stories today, but no two people are the same. There is no right answer. There is no textbook cure for this. So if there was, oh my gosh, whoever makes this up, they would be, I don't even know. I mean, they would just be famous, because everywhere I go, when I travel to different states and I do different conferences, the one thing people just want answers, but the hardest thing with this is there is no cure. So what I like to do is tell people to accept where they're at. This requires a lot of acceptance. But let's look at this side, because fear, all of these, let's say negative emotions at the bottom. This is where a lot of the clients that are hoarding are living in. So shame is probably the biggest one. And shame is the lowest one on this scale. And shame is not that you have done something bad. Shame is that I am bad. It is really hard to get people to live in those upper, higher, more positive, say, emotions when they're stuck in these bottom ones. And fear is definitely in there. And it's running rampant right now, even for everyone. So this is a place where we can all just take a look at fear. Let's just say fear, or even shame or guilt. These are all thoughts in our head, and they're also energy. So if we look at these different areas, and just the key to eliminating them and to moving up is, the first thing is to become aware of them. So that's really where you'll want to understand that you are not your thoughts in your head. So we are human beings that have thoughts. We don't have to believe all of the thoughts that we have. In fact, most of the thoughts that we have, they don't come true anyway. Worry, we think about the past, we think about the future. We're always thinking. This is what our brains love to do. But we have to get into the place where we're not believing all of our thoughts, because they take us into those lower emotions. And it is no different with hoarding. I think that shame is probably the biggest one. When I meet people, they will almost, I would say almost all of them, 90% will say, I am ashamed to let people in. And this is what stops people. And all of you guys who should be getting into the doors, the front doors, it's shame. They're ashamed and they're afraid. So they're afraid of authorities, and they're living in that fear, and they're ashamed. So let's talk a little bit about what actually the definition of hoarding is. This comes out of the DSM, which I have another slide on that. But hoarding definition is, first, it has to meet all 4 criteria. So just because of this current pandemic, if you went out and bought toilet paper, it wouldn't necessarily mean that you would be labeled somebody who has hoarding disorder. This would be the definition. So excessive accumulation of stuff. So this is what normally people see, excessive accumulation of stuff. The second aspect is difficulty discarding possessions. So this is extreme difficulty discarding possessions, and those possessions can sometimes even be trash. So what we might consider trash, that's not really how they see it. It's extreme difficulty discarding their possessions. Unusable living spaces. So this is the one that most of you will be able to see. So if you're able to walk into a house, you would be able to see that they can't access their kitchen counters or their stove or their sink, their couch. It's not functioning. You can't use your kitchen table, so, or your shower. Unusual living spaces is a good indication that there is a problem. Otherwise, you could be a collector. A lot of times people want to know the difference between collecting and hoarding. Collecting is usually when you're really proud of what you have and you display it and it's in a more organized and neat way, versus unusable living spaces. And then the last one is that it causes distress or impairment. So that would be the authorities are getting involved because a neighbor has complained. So if you're in an apartment and it's creating odors, the management is involved, that's the distress or impairment. Or it can also be your family is concerned, your friends are concerned. When it gets to this point, if you have all four of these, then it is likely that you might have trouble with hoarding. So as I mentioned, hoarding is listed in the DSM, which is the Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. The thing about this is it's only been listed since 2013. So that's the relatively new. They used to lump it in with OCD, but they don't do that anymore. It is listed as its own diagnosis. So for insurance reasons, it can be used for that, and discrimination. You also cannot discriminate against hoarding. However, because it is so new, it's lacking nationally and actually internationally. I think there's a lot of places in the UK and Australia that I'm in groups with, and they are also having a lot of problems. But because it is so new, it's lacking in resources and it's lacking in research. So, and this is apparent in everywhere that I go speak, in all of the bigger conferences, is that people want answers, they want resources, but there's just not a lot of them out there. So it's going to take a community of people, and each and every one of us can do our part. That's why having discussions like this, hopefully it will turn into a discussion with the questions. They're really good because I've been doing this for 12 years. This last year, 2019, leading up to now, I will tell you that I have seen more cases, and the cases that I have been involved with have been the worst that I have seen yet. And so I think is happening is the demographic of people, let's say the baby boomers, they're just having more and more and more time to build it up. So I think that we're all going to see an increase in the level of cases that are unsafe because of the length of time that the individuals have been accumulating stuff. It's just becoming more and more and more. So, which is probably why Erin was receiving more calls. I too have found an increase. But with that said, I also think the environment is different, and the cases that I've been involved in, people have really not as resistant. In other words, they're helping. The clients want the help. They're getting rid of the items. So they're not as resistant as they used to be. They actually want to get rid of it so they can stay in their homes. But let's talk a little bit about what the hoarding disorder is. It is a complex and serious mental illness because it affects not only just the person, but the surroundings and then the inherent safety of that. So it can be from learned behavior. It can be hereditary, so genetics play a part in it. What it does is it affects that place in the brain, the prefrontal cortex. So that place in the brain that is responsible for organizing, decision making. It is shown in studies that it doesn't respond the same as somebody without hoarding. What I would tell you is that in my experience, it is unresolved childhood trauma is a pretty good indicator. And that can be when people say that my grandparents lived in the Depression, that was a traumatic event for them. So it's unresolved childhood trauma. And sometimes when it's so extreme, the individuals, they lose, let's say, faith, and they lose their connection with an adult or the human adult in their life, and they associate more with things than they do with people, because the people have hurt them. The people have done them wrong. They have suffered in some way. And sometimes it can be extreme. And in that event, then they've found more safety and security in things. And then what happens is they carry this on, and then in adulthood, a traumatic event might happen. So let's say a traumatic event is a death, a divorce, an accident. That happens, and then it starts to spur on the hoarding behavior. And then, as this slide indicates, 75% of those with hoarding disorder also have a coexisting mental illness, such as depression or anxiety. So not only does the person have hoarding tendencies, they can have something else. And that's what makes it so complex to treat, is that you're dealing with many other facets to an individual. So then how do we help them? I know I know that it's not easy. And I know that you just can't tell someone to clean it up. So it all has to do with expectations. So I have this slide because it's like telling someone to just go clean up. Like, it's time to just go clean up your home and declutter. That's like telling somebody who's depressed to just be happy, just cheer up. Or it's like telling an alcoholic, can't you just have one drink? Like, just one. It doesn't work like that with hoarding either. There's a Marie Kondo, if you're all familiar with that, if you've heard of her, she had a show on Netflix, and she has written a book, and The Magic of Tidying Up. And in the book, she says, like, to gather everything up all in one area and then hold it up. Like, if it's clothes, hold it up, really look at it, resonate with it, ask, does this bring joy? And if it doesn't spark joy, then get rid of it. Tactics like that don't really work with hoarding. I had one lady who had said, well, yeah, if that was the case, everything brings me joy. So it doesn't really work like that. You have to really go about it a different way. And the one thing that you can do is lower expectations. So just how you think a house should be, look, and feel is not at all how it needs to be, look, and feel. It should be safe, but it doesn't have to look like Martha Stewart. That's probably a really common thing that I have run into. Okay, so I have this slide because we are really focusing on let's say, this hierarchy of needs. When people with hoarding, their psychological needs at the very bottom are their safety. This is the plumbing, the heating, the feeling safe, like you're not going to get your landlord called or the authorities called. This is the area that needs to be focused on first, in my opinion, before therapy. So I think ideally everyone would agree that at some point in time, these individuals would require therapy to get better. But in my experience, I think that what people need is community. They need to feel safe. They need to feel accepted and belonged, and and not afraid to live in and be in their homes. So if we can help get their homes to a point where it is safe, then at some point in time, what works well is then once they're feeling a little bit better, then they can start to begin to look at therapy or a support group. But many times it's really hard with this demographic of individuals to get them to leave the house and to go see a therapist. And likewise, on the other side of that, there are not a lot of therapists that specialize in hoarding. So from what I have been told, because I've tried to find people who want to specialize in hoarding, is that the way the model works now, which it might be changing because everything is online, and if everybody's doing virtual sessions, then this might be a good thing for people with hoarding. But in the past, therapists said that hoarding, they could not go and meet them in their homes. So they would be therapists in their traditional model was in the office, and that people with hoarding were typically not the best clients. So they would cancel, they would be no-shows. So that is why a lot of people that I knew that did focus on hoarding as in therapy, they no longer focused on it. So it makes it a little bit difficult. But in my experience, I have shown that there's a lot of different ways where a community can come together and make a big difference. One of those cases I want to talk about is, her name is Judy, and I'm not using the right names, so nor the right pictures. So for confidential reasons, the names that I'm giving are not the names of the people that I'm talking about. But this one was pretty recent, and Judy called up and had also been removed from her home because by the fire department. So she went to the hospital, and then when she was released, she went to a hotel. So when Judy called us to say, hey, I'm in a hotel, can you come to my home, look at it, give me an estimate, I need to be able to come back home. So I went over there with two of my team, two of my guys, and we also had to go in through the back door. This was by far the, when I say worst, I just mean it in the sense of volume. She had a 4-bedroom house, kitchen, living room, 4 bedrooms. And it was, if you could see me, here's the ceiling. All throughout her house was 2 feet from the ceiling. It was like a crawl space, and it was all throughout the house. So she was using extension cords up to plug in lights. We couldn't even tell what room we were in down the hallway. She was using the light fixtures as little, like her pens would be stuck in the light fixture. She was basically living 2 feet from the ceiling the entire time. She had no running water, no furnace, no beds. She was just on a pile. So Judy calls, and I did not think that this was going to work. And I was like, I tried to help her find other methods, because I just did not think that she would have the ability to remove everything. When I say other methods, there are people out there that could buy up a home. So sometimes that's a really good alternative. If the person simply can't live there, they can buy up a home, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But with Judy, we got to know her really well, and she allowed us to go in and clean out and make the decisions while she was in the hotel room. And so the thing that I really want to talk about Judy is what she was dealing with how her home impacted her and what the public thought of her. So she had been tormented by her neighbors for a long time. She had told me that what I was seeing was 40 years of depression piled up high. She was a brilliant person. She worked for a really well-known company. She was a brilliant engineer, smart woman who let her home get out of hand. And I'll tell you an example of what people don't realize, how people who live with hoarding are discriminated against, made fun of. On the Nextdoor app, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but there was a Nextdoor app. Somebody, while Judy was in a hotel, a neighbor actually went into this woman's house, went into Judy's house, and took pictures and posted them for everybody to see, to shame her. So I was appalled. It's illegal. It's trespassing. Her back door was broke where the fire department had to get her out. She was mortified. She couldn't believe that this neighbor lady who had such a problem would go in and take a picture and then post it and talk bad about it. So that was one thing she was dealing with. Judy, on the other hand, her car broke down. So her car was also pretty packed. As with hoarding, you can't hide it. So it's her illness, and it's for everyone to see. Her car is packed. Her car breaks down. She can drive it. So she does some research, and I know what she's thinking. But she tells me, I'm taking my car to Christian Brothers Automotive. Can you meet me over there? She said she wanted a ride. So I'm like, sure. So I go over there to meet her, and I help her clean out the whole front seat. There was a truck. Help her clean out all of the stuff in her front seat. And I go inside with her, and they denied her service. And the guys at this automotive, I didn't mean to badmouth them, but at this point, they just denied her service for who she was. And she did not cry through the entire thing, but she cried. She just broke down, and enough was enough at the treatment. This was such a strong individual. We ended up being able to clean out her whole house, and she got new carpet and new paint, and her place is fabulous. And it took a lot, but the point of it is what these individuals have to go through in terms of the public. So keep that in mind, that you never know what these individuals are going through. This is just a slide with how we do what we do. Step 1, initial evaluation and introduction. So this is probably the most important part. And this is probably the part where you guys are really needing information, is how do you even start to have the conversation? What can you say? How do you even get in the door? So I have some information on the next slides about that. And then trust building strategy session. Step 2, this is just the first step. So this usually only lasts 1 hour, maybe 2, because this is where we learn a lot about the person, and you can't rush it. So if anybody tries to go through these first 2 steps too quickly, it'll stall the entire project, and possibly they won't continue. So by building trust, which requires a lot of listening and not a lot of judgment, and lowering of the expectations, then you can begin a safety cleanup sessions. And this will be, it just depends on what is needed, but it could be, 3 sessions, 5 sessions, 2 sessions. And then from there, we do what is next for ongoing and follow-up maintenance. But let's talk a little bit about that first conversation that we have with people. This is where I would say never make assumptions, because whatever you're thinking is probably not what's truly going on inside their own minds. So these are some questions you can ask. What are you most nervous about? This is a good one because these could be things that you would never think of until you ask. So it could be, I'm nervous about my neighbors seeing a truck outside. I'm nervous that you're going to take away pictures that I don't want to go. This could be anything. I'm nervous of having your team come in and see how I've lived. I'm nervous that you're going to see. There's just, my point in, don't make assumptions. So this is a good one because it'll help them to verbalize what it is that is really making them nervous. And then you can reassure them. I'm nervous that if you come in, that they're going to take my house. So this is where you're going to uncover it. How long have you lived here? I usually tend to ask that. And by asking a relatively easy question to answer, one that has numbers in it, it really puts them at ease because it's not emotional. It gets a conversation going. It's just anything you can do in the very beginning to put them at ease with just talking. They don't have to think about it. How long have you lived here? That's a pretty good one that can bring them off on a tangent. Have you ever had someone help you before? This is good because you're going to find out if they have had help and where it went wrong. So sometimes people volunteer, a church might come in and volunteer, and then people have a bad taste in their mouth because of that. Or a family member has come in, didn't really respect what they did and had a different timeline, and then just decided to throw something out. Then you're going to uncover that with this question. And then, do you plan to stay in your home or move? Most people like to stay in their home, but if they do have a plan to move, you can help them with that, because many times they don't have to clean it out. They can take only what they need and then move. So these are some questions. And here are some statements that I have found really tend to put people at ease. And so, although I'm giving you these questions and the statements, I want to say that you can't hide your own judgments and your own emotions, because most of our communication is nonverbal anyway. So when you are faced with talking to someone who's maybe living in an extreme condition, the less judgment you have about it, the more you see them as a person, the better they can feel it. It doesn't really matter what you say, it's more how you feel. And that's the nonverbal side of it. So here's some reassuring statements. You're not alone. Many people live like you. So the fact that they're isolated, they tend to think that they're the only ones that live like this. They start to really feel that shame and judgment. You see it all the time. I see it all the time. I'm not shocked by it. This also helps put them at ease. Similar, there's a lot of people that have challenges. This makes you no different than anyone else. This is not the worst I have ever seen. I've all said that up until this year. But when I say worst, I don't mean it in a negative sense. And if the more understanding you have of their current situation and how it could be overwhelming, I mean, if you can put yourself in their shoes to understand that there's a lot going on in their minds that you may not even know, and they can't see a way out. If you're constricted in your minds and you cannot see an answer or how it could look any different or where to start, if you can understand that, you can take it slow and have a conversation step by step. And control is a really big thing too. So a lot of people want to maintain control so they don't have to throw everything out. A lot of times they're under this common misconception that once somebody comes in to help, everything is going to get thrown out. And one thing that if you're going through the process of helping people, one thing that usually doesn't work is if you try to understand it. So let's say you're in the clean out and you're say, why would you want to have 6 of these? Like, to be combative with that and judge somebody and make them justify everything, that just creates an environment that doesn't make it easy. Okay. So the uniform inspection checklist, you guys might have seen this. You may even use one or one similar. But the uniform inspection checklist is general guidelines. So this can be used to help people understand, because the more objective information that you give them and not subjective. In other words, if you say, oh, you just got to clean up and declutter and leave it open, that doesn't really help them formulate in their mind what needs to be done. So a uniform inspection checklist kind of says your sinks must function, your refrigerator can't have rotten food and stuff like that. Your aisleways must be 36 inches wide. The uniform inspection checklist can be good. And I will tell you that sometimes, like, we can use this inspection checklist and say it is for safety for the firefighters. So if you say, we don't want your home to be at risk in case you have a fire. Firefighters will have to come in and we're putting them at risk. Sometimes trying to get individuals to even understand this, it's not easy. So it's like I compare it to if I'm trying to get my 3-year-old granddaughter to take a nap. I know she has to take a nap. I know she's going to feel better. But trying to get me to explain to her, if you take a nap, you're really going to feel better. It's going to be a good thing. It's the same thing with this. Sometimes it takes some like Jedi mind tricks and a lot of communication to get them to understand how following this is going to be a good thing, because it's not always easy. And sometimes they're really not understanding. Here's a hoarding individual, and it is not uncommon to have all of these agencies involved in one case. So if you can see this, all of this for one person, and you can understand why they're afraid. This is a lot of authority. This is a lot of individuals that are involved in one case. It can make anybody bring up that fear in their brain. So I think that, there was a story of a group in Boston that spent $16,000 on one individual with all of this different agencies, and they did a full clean out. And within a year, it was all piled right back up. So the point is, like, you never know that it takes a community. And so if everybody's on the same page, and just have a deeper understanding that this can be a little bit traumatizing and overwhelming for an individual to have to face all of this in an authoritative kind of way. Human beings are meant for connection, and they're meant for relationships. And I think that community is usually with us when we have the most impact and find the most success. It's with individuals that have some type of a support, whether it's a friendly neighbor, somebody in their family that's not judgmental, somebody in the community that can enforce it in a compassionate way. So enforcement is key, because somebody in maybe one of these areas can be the enforcer, but it can be in a compassionate way, and then provide them the resources to help. That's usually the model that works. Because without a community that is understanding, that is not judgmental, then it's really tough. And that's the kind that you can't get in the door, and it becomes a battle. Anytime it creates a battle between right and wrong, and you have to do this, it makes it a lot less successful. If you can embrace it, acknowledge that this is where they're at, that you understand that it could be different, and come without the judgment, that usually is more successful. Which reminds me of a story with, her name is Mary. Mary was in a low-income senior home. And so we got called in by the management of the company, of the building, and they just said, hey, there's some odor that's coming from Mary. Can you go in? Can you help? So I said, okay. So I go to the door, and I come to the door to see Mary. Mary answers the door. She's in a purple shirt and gray sweatpants, and she is feisty. She doesn't want anybody there, and she lets it be known. She's not happy. She doesn't want to see me. She had got notices on the door, so she knew that she needed to make some changes, but she wasn't very happy about it. So I talked with Mary. She shows me around. What happened in her instance is that she had inherited some stuff when her mom died. Again, it's very common. This isn't uncommon at all, but she inherited stuff from her mom, and it was still packed in boxes, and it was piled high, and then her trash hasn't been taken out, and her dishes were full. And so she showed me around, and I said, okay, are you ready to have us come back? We'll come back in a week, and we'll get started. We'll just do 2 hours at a time. So I leave. I come back. She lets us in the next day. I see Mary. She has the same purple shirt, the same gray sweatpants. We start working slowly. And now we're building some rapport. She's beginning to trust me. We got a lot done. I put at some point I piled high all of her laundry, and I cleaned out her shower because I had noticed that part of the odor in her home was actually coming from her. So when I left, I said, Mary, between now and the time that I come back, can you do your laundry? And now you can use the shower. A week comes, I come back, I ring the doorbell. Here comes Mary. She has that same purple shirt and the same gray sweatpants. And now I'm concerned. And I said, Mary, what's going on? Why? I said, you're still wearing the same clothes. And that's when she said, she stopped. We sat down, and she said, I was raped in the laundry room, and I'm afraid to go down there anymore. And I just took a step back. And then she said, and I can't take a shower because I need to go to the doctor because I think I have an infection and it hurts. So then I realized that we really don't know what's going on with people, and we can assume. And on the surface, it just looked like she didn't want to do these things, but there was a much deeper reason. And by her trusting and opening up and me listening, I could get her some help, get her to the doctor. So I think it requires a lot of openness and not making assumptions. So I think with the judgment, this is what I want to leave you guys with this, because judgment, they say that you've heard the story say when you're pointing one finger at someone, you're pointing 3 more back at yourself. So they also say when you're judging someone, either negative or positive, if someone has a trait that you identify with, a negative or positive, It's because you have that same trait. You can't see it otherwise. It's called a mirror. So we're all in relationship and they're mirroring back something within us. So for example, if you have a really good friend and you like that you have this friend because they're really kind, and you say, oh, you know, Sally is such a kind individual. I really like that about her. It's because you have that same kindness inside of you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to recognize it. The same thing goes with judgment. So with negative. So let's say you're really triggered and you really are bothered by someone. And let's say it's control. So I just think that person is so controlling and they're, you know, that bothers you, and you really understand that you have a problem with it. Then I think that is because you also have that same judgment against yourself with that same trait. It's hard and it takes a little bit of awareness and some digging, but that's usually the case. You can't see something in someone else. And so that is what with hoarding and with anybody in our communities, if we can get to know the person a little bit better, then we can not make the assumptions and put them more at ease. So what I have found in my last 12 years of working with these individuals is that in time, we are all the same. So we are the same. We are humans. We have suffered, but we're also smart, funny, intelligent. That judging someone for the way they live, it makes it harder to get to know the real person. But I've got to know them as real individuals, and they want to thrive. They know they don't want to live like that. While they may put up a fight, the more patient and understanding you can be, the better it is, and the more success they'll have at staying inside their homes. And so I think we can start to go. This one is a good one. Abraham Lincoln. I do not like that man. I must get to know him better. I think that's also kind of timely for where we're at, because as I say, in this environment, there's a lot of people that are afraid right now. So off the topic of hoarding, there's a lot of people that are afraid. They're afraid of their jobs. They're afraid of where they're living. They're afraid of the uncertainty of what's going on. I think that everyone is different. So if you can hold space for that, have compassion for someone and what they're going through, it will just make everything a little bit easier as we go through all of these uncertain times. And if you recognize that you're getting triggered and that you're getting angry or you're becoming afraid, then I think you can always draw it inward instead of blaming other people. We can always draw it inward, and ultimately that is what changes. The way you respond to somebody is when you do the work and you change on the inside. So this is my contact information, and so I'm going to leave this just for a moment so you can write it down. It kind of cut off. Oops, let's go back. 720-982-7856. If anyone on this call has any questions, they want to talk through a case, I open up my line for that. And I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and then we're going to go to Erin and Amanda have resources that I put together, because I know that's a big thing. And then hopefully they're going to ask me some questions, and we can spend the rest of this webinar with questions. So let me bring up the resources, and I just want to say that I am available for consultation there. Okay, so now Amanda can get it back up. There we go. and ask me any questions. So first I'll go through these resources quickly, and then they can ask me some questions. Colorado Hoarding Task Force, I started it. It's a group that we are trying to just have a place online for resources. So there's clean out companies, there was some therapists, there was some support groups, but it's always dependent upon your county. So if I know you guys are in Summit County, I can kind of give you more if you send an email through Colorado Hoarding. Hope for Hoarding is coaching online. Facebook is a wonderful group right now. There's probably 20,000 people in a support group on Facebook, and it is active. So they are supporting each other. It is active. So for those individuals that you know may struggle with hoarding that are online, Facebook is a great, great social place because they hold each other accountable. The Clutter Movement, Children of Hoarders, and Chat Room, all of that, those are all online. And then we can talk a little bit about if I need to volunteers, Craigslist, and then cleaning companies. So how do we want to do the questions?
I can read them out loud to you. You should be able to access them on your chat too, but since I don't think the rest of the attendees can see it, I will read them out loud.
Perfect.
So here's the first one. When you're dealing with an aging parent, do you recommend having downsizing / decluttering conversations or have a mediator to help? If your parent has been avoiding their cluttered space for years, but now has the capacity to work on it, doesn't want your help, but is still avoiding it, what are practical ways to check in on the status and re-engage the convo?
Okay, let me see if I can read that. That was a lot. So they're downsizing. Let's see. Let me find it. Oh, here we go. Okay. I mean, if you could have a mediator, I think that is great. The thing about the downsizing and decluttering conversations, I always like to ask why. So are they actually moving? Because that's a really good catalyst to get them to do something. Procrastination is just going to happen inevitably. But if they are actually going to move, then there's going to be a deadline, and that might spur things on a little bit faster, because having a downsizing and decluttering conversation, it is needed. So if your parent has been avoiding, that's the procrastination. It's because it's overwhelming. And so it can happen a number of different ways, but if they've been avoiding it for years, maybe have the conversation and really understand why. Again, it's kind of back to that. Are you nervous about this? Are you nervous that you're not going to be in control, that we're going to throw things out? The kind of a better understanding of the why, what is helping to create the avoidance or the procrastination. Practical ways to check in on the status and re-engage. Yeah, I mean, I think it all just comes down to communication and having a conversation and really understanding the big why and why, what is like having the behavior. And I'll come back to that if I can think of something else, but let's, I can read them now. So it might be a little easier if I just read them. So Julie says, can you speak to individuals who hoard animals? Mm-hmm. So animal hoarding is less common. I mean, it just depends, I think, on the situation. It's a little bit more complex. It does require another agency to get involved when the animals are at risk of being harmed. So even though people who hoard animals may feel like they're doing a good thing because of their attachments to the animals and they really want to save them, it just depends on what they're hoarding, it can create negative consequences for the animals. So it requires a lot more, I would think, mental help in understanding that, and then the agency that's going to take in to get the animals out to help make them safe. So animal hoarding is not as prevalent, and I think it just requires a whole different team to work with someone and a lot more patience. So I would say having animal control out, or an agency that is familiar with it, because most of those people are familiar with animal hoarding as well. Okay. So I had a client who was willing to get help. The cleaning company, like yours, was unwilling to help and refused going into her trailer due to safety concerns. The town also refused to condemn her home because they feel it's safer for her there than on the streets. Any suggestions? Yeah, this can be hard when they're really wanting help, but they can't find it. And I'm guessing that you're not in an area where it's prevalent and there's a lot of clean out companies. Because there are some clean out companies that do more hazardous. So like Clean is one that I know goes all over Colorado. So wherever you're located, they're also 1-800-Hoarders is their other word, but Clean will come. That is one thing, and I can follow up with you, because if I did a little bit more research on an actual cleaning company that is familiar with it, then that would eliminate the concerns, because not everybody likes to work under those conditions if they can smell it, or if there's animals or stuff like that. So condemning the home is probably not the best, because then what would she do? And if she owns the home, then it probably is helpful to get it to a point where she can stay in it. So I would say on the Colorado Hoarding Task Force is listed Clean. And then depending upon where you are, we may even be able to go up there and help. And as far as pricing goes, which is funny, now I see it, a little bit about pricing. It's not always as expensive as one might think. I think it has a bad rap for some companies bid the entire project and they want to like assume that everything goes and it's totally redone, and that can be in the tens of thousands. But there's also another way. So if we talk about our cost with Clutter Trucker, there's an hourly rate and then a load size. So 18 cubic yards, our pricing is about between $600 and $700 to fill a dumpster. And so, if it's a smaller house, like if we're dealing with an apartment, 1 to 2 loads, which would be about $1,000 to remove stuff, usually gets them to a point where they can live more safe. And then the hourly rate is $95 an hour for cleaning. So if it's a little further, there might be a trip fee included, like a trip fee in terms of if it takes an hour for us to drive up. Again, between 5 and 10 hours can do a lot. It isn't that it would be perfect or it would be an entire home makeover, but we don't like to turn people away. And most of the time we can get it to a point where another service can get in and work. So like the example above, if you can get someone in to eliminate the very first layer of stuff that is hazardous or not pleasant, then a regular cleaning company could come in, maybe on a more regular basis, or home health care. So that's really where we would try to work with them. Do you know what types of funding is available for low income? I do know that in the past there has been low income funding available from Dr. Cog. I know a lot of them are on this call for different counties. Jefferson County would probably be the furthest west. So as far as the counties that are way up in the mountains, I'm not familiar. Do you know of any, Erin?
Yeah, I'll add something, Jen. We currently have a voucher program for chore services. And when we started hearing that this was a need for our older adults in the region, we are open to utilizing our Older American Act dollars to assist with hoarding clean out, and even family members of like a caregiver of an older adult, doing a consultation over the phone with Jen first. So we are open to that. But to remember, our service area is Jackson, Grand, Eagle, Summit, and Pitkin counties, because I know there's a lot of people on the call outside of that area.
Okay.
And we provide services for people 16 over or for caregivers of people 16 over. So it would have to kind of fit in those parameters. But within our AAA region, we're open to funding the needs.
Okay. Yeah, and as far as, so in some of the other counties, I know that I've helped people over the phone in some of the counties outside of the local Denver metro area where resources aren't as abundant. One thing that people can use, or it's all you really need, is one volunteer. And there's a lot of people out there that really do want to volunteer and have the capacity to be a leader and volunteer their time to help. It has shown to be really successful if you have at least one person that understands it and that can direct the other people. So in other words, like if there's an organization that can volunteer, maybe even a dumpster, so that's not always the best case, but a consultation with me, I can kind of help you formulate whether a dumpster is going to be good, whether their on-site trash service is going to be good. And then one volunteer having a conversation with me just to get some tips and pointers can really get the ball rolling. If you have somebody that wants to volunteer because they want to control or they want to make things what they think, that's not going to do any bit of good. So again, I offer that up, and I'll do the consultations and kind of formulate a plan in the areas that don't have all of the different agencies that we have. Okay, is someone who buys food that covers all empty spaces considered hoarding? Good question. There's so many different types of people who hoard different things. There are people who would be considered food hoarding. And that's when they just can't get rid of even expired goods, and there's food that has been in their pantries and in their shelves and in their basements and on their their refrigerators since the 70s and 80s. That then might be considered someone who is considered hoarding. I tried not to get bogged down in the language of all of this, because what can look like hoarding sometimes doesn't always, it isn't hoarding. So sometimes it's a physical limitation. So let's just say sometimes you look into a house and you see it and it's full, but nobody's ever offered to help. And if somebody says, I can help you, they're more than willing to get rid of it. They just physically haven't been able to do it. That's not considered hoarding. That's just, they need a little bit of help. And then physically, maybe they were depressed or they had an injury that prevented them from cleaning their homes. But yes, there is those people that do tend to want to buy food. Again, it's creating safety for a lot of people. In the event that something does happen, like these days, I'm imagining there's a lot of people that are stockpiling food. I don't know. I try not to overthink it with the brain and put a lot of definitions to it. If it's genuinely creating a problem and there's rodents and they're getting at it, then it's probably something that needs to be looked at. And again, if it's been there since the 70s, there's probably something that's, even if they did eat it, it's not going to be safe. So there's a conversation to be had. Okay. Carly, sometimes the homes are in such distress after all the clutter is gone or organized. Carpet needs replaced. Yeah. Paint needs attention. How do you help people with these needs if they don't have the financial or physical capability to do so? I know it's so hard. This is the parts of the programs that it can tend to get a little frustrating because there is not a lot of agencies out there. I mean, there are some down here. There's Brothers Redevelopment. There's another Houses for Warriors projects where they donate funds. It's sort of like Extreme Home Makeover. You know, I would say a lot of social media can be used to get volunteers. If once everything's gone, if the person really does need help with painting and carpet and flooring, and I think we need to come together as a community. And there's so many people out there that want to help, so many people, but they just don't know how. So I think it requires someone to be motivated to put it out there in whatever way they think. So if they're in an organization with a church, if they're online on the Nextdoor app, the more we can relate to each other and help, the better it will be. So I think that I was just on a project up north and he put it out on Facebook and I offered up one of the trucks. But there was a lot of people in the community that actually showed up, given either their time or money or skill. And I think with what's going on economically, financially, we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. So to get ahead of the game, I think that we can come together as a community when there's not a lot of funding out there with nonprofits. That would be my suggestion, is to gather up people of like mind that want to help. Okay, it is recorded, and this, yes. So she says, will I receive the link for the recorded session? And will I be able to share it? So Erin.
Yes. So
Okay.
give us a little bit of time to cut any things out that need to get edited probably at the beginning of this before y'all all came, and get a link for it. And then everyone who signed up, I have all of your email addresses through the Zoom registration and we can send out a link.
Okay, good. Just a few more. Yeah, I'm glad to see that all of the people that are in the homes, I know home health care and therapists, it's hard. And those are usually really good reasons for people to make a change. So as people age, one of the things like we usually say is we can help if you want to stay in your home. One of the things that we can help prepare your home so that you can get help in. So it's eliminating all of the stereotype and the judgment you need to declutter. It's sort of helping them say, this is a conversation that most people have to go through. If you're aging in your home, we want to help you make it safe so that a therapist or somebody in home care can help come in. And it doesn't mean that we're judging you. It's just kind of a fact of aging. So we all need to do wills and life insurance and do financial planning. Just kind of, this is a regular cleaning and sorting as we age. Try to make it as normal and natural, because truly it is. And then other people can get in their homes to help. If a client has no way to pay, which is so common, yes, what are the other ways people can help paying for this service? Yeah. So one of the things I also offer is to have a conversation with family members. So many times family members are not the best people because there's too much emotion. But if you know, it's another good question. If you know of a client that has a family member that's living far away, many times they have no idea how that person is truly living. And if they did know, they would be wanting to donate funds to have somebody help them. So if there's a way that you could get family or friends to help pay if they truly don't have the money, that would be one way to do it. And I have a way of talking with family to explain what it is, and kind of going forth that way. I'm trying to think of the other ways to pay. We've talked about volunteering. Many times they have the money, so it's just a choice. It's getting them to understand, am I going to buy something new? Because if you're going to buy something new, you have money to buy, to have the decluttering. It's just a reframing of, and that takes a little bit of, again, patience, understanding, to get them to understand you actually do have the money. But there's many different cases. So I say a way to get creative. And again, I offer up my phone because I kind of know, if I know more about the situation, I can offer ways. Is there any type of financial assistance? A lot of our clients don't have the financial means. I know, but still need the help, and they want the help. This is where I would also say it comes down to maybe Adult Protective sometimes has emergency funding, and I'm not sure how all of the different counties, but I know Adult Protection has emergency funding if it is, they're going to stay in the home. So there are some government agencies that do. Again, it depends on the county, and we have a lot of range here. So it's hard. This is the hardest part of any type of presentation. And it's not only for Colorado. So I talked in Washington, I talked in Wyoming, I've talked everywhere, and every state says the same thing. So I think at some point we're going to need to start coming together and helping these clients in need in a different way. And so, like, starting support groups, starting task force. It doesn't even need to be specific to hoarding. I think there's also just a lot of seniors that live in their homes that need help and maybe don't. So maybe they just need help cleaning and they're not physically able to do that. So, all right. That's good. So we have 4 minutes. I think that was it. But again, I think that it's easy. So for all of you, I offer up my phone number because it's so much easier to ask and answer questions back and forth to get a little bit more information. But I definitely am open to doing that. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate all of your insight and information and guidance. I think one of my biggest takeaways is the need for education to reduce the stigma.
Yeah.
So thank you for educating us and being a resource here in Colorado. So, and thanks to everybody who joined. This was wildly successful. So clearly we all see it as a need in our area. So thanks for taking the time out this morning, and we will take this recording and get the link out so you can share it with your network. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jen.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.